This is a two-part video that I suggest that people should watch prior to the readings. Now, this first part is just basics on location astrology, on how to understand your maps that'll be in your reading and also included in your booklet. So this is a very basic overview, so you at least have a basic understanding. So when I do your reading, you can have, familiarity. The second part, you don't have to watch prior to a reading, though I suggest you might be interested in it. It's very interesting spiritual books and also other ancient texts that are very relatable to the mysteries of Vedic and Nadi and Classical Astrology. So let's get started. When I do your readings, there's going to be 5 sections to the booklet. The first section is going to be real basic stuff on signs, planets, and houses. Section 2 is going to be about Vedic astrology, which is also known as Jyotisha, which I mentioned in the other video. The third section is the topic of this video, which is real basic stuff on location astrology. So let's start with that. Okay, as you can see, this is a location astrology map. And I put up a guy you might have heard of, George Carlin. You can see, I just put up his chart. So we're just going to use it since he's gone, and I don't think he'll mind too much if we use his chart. So it's a way to look at Astro-Location Astrology. Now, I have to tell you, your astrology will be different, completely different. Every single person. So if you have people in your family, wives and husbands, or you have children or parents or whoever it is that you're associated with, partners, etc., you're going to find that the astrology is going to be completely different for them than it is for you. So what this does is it takes your birth chart and extrapolates it across the globe. See, like since he's gone, we can mention him. George was born May 12th, 1937 at 11:45 approximate. This is an approximate birth time, a.m. in New York, New York. Okay. Actually, I think he grew up in Hell's Kitchen. So the bottom line is everyone's chart will be different. Just to point that out. So this is not going to be the same for you. So here's the most important thing when you get your reading and your booklet. Each of these planetary lines, and these are the thick vertical and angular lines that I'm tracing here. We'll get to the horizontal lines in a minute, but these vertical lines, it doesn't matter the color, are the most important and most powerful energies in the chart. And notice each one is either going to have AS, which is sunrise, which means personal. You blend that planetary's meaning to personal, or MC, which is where the sun is at noon, stands for the median colae or midheaven. So you emphasize whatever planet has an MC nomenclature next to it as career. It's real simple to think about it that way. The DS nomenclature is always going to be the descendant, where the sun descends every day, or the 7th house cusp, which means partnerships and relationships. And the last one is the IC. You can see I'm circling here. The IC means home, family, real estate. So any planet you see on AS is personal, MC is career, DS is partnerships and relationships, and IC will emphasize home, family, real estate. And again, you're all going to have a unique chart. I'm just using this one as an example. Now, notice at the upper left-hand corner up here, you can see where I'm highlighting. That is latitude. And the next set of digits is longitude. Now, those guys become your friends in location astrology because we can look anywhere in the world, which you can see if I slid over here to Europe and Africa and all that, everybody's going to have different energies. This is, again, only George's energies. So it's just an example. So here's the point. If you get on any one of these planets, now when they're vertical, it's really easy to see. Like you could see George had a Neptune IC line running right through Los Angeles, or very, very close to it, at 118 West 27. You can see where I'm getting that up at the upper left-hand corner of the screen. So if George was right on it, which he was, he lived in Brentwood, if he was right on that line, that would be like going to a concert and standing in front of the band with your pant legs vibrating. Exceedingly powerful, you see? And all of you are going to find wherever you have a line like that, you see the longitude, that is like going, again, to a concert, standing right up in front of the band. Your pant leg vibrates. Very, very powerful. I use the sound analogy because it's very accurate. Here's the point. When you get right on a line, again, standing in front of the band with your pant legs vibrating, 300 miles to the west of any of these these lines is like the front row of the concert hall. 600 is the back of the concert hall, and 900 is out in the parking lot. So they have like a long sloping bell curve to the west. And just like light and sound, if any of you have ever heard of something called the inverse square law, that's a term used in physics for dissipation of energy logarithmically. So the closer you get to these, the more powerful they get exponentially, and the farther away you get, the weaker, just like light and sound. Now, when you go east of a line, 100 miles is the front row of the concert hall instead of 3, 200 is the back, and 300 is pretty much off the radar screen. So that's applicable to any one of these energies across the globe for each one of you. And again, I remind you, this is only George's chart. Somebody else is going to be different. So when you get right on them, exceedingly powerful. 300 miles to the east, off the radar screen. And they exponentially increase, just like walking up to something that's very loud gets really loud when you get right next to it. So that's the nature of each one of these planets. And I should also remind you that everyone says to me, Jeff, show me the best place to go live. And I always say, well, there's a lot more flavors on the menu than best, worst, good, and bad. And this is where astrology really shines in location astrology. I love this stuff because it is exceedingly descriptive and accurate. Like, for instance, what did George Carlin have over the Los Angeles area? Well, he had a Neptune line. And remember, I told you the IC is home family real estate. And George did have a few problems with drugs and alcohol in his earlier years. He would be the first one to tell you that. And he later overcame it. Now, what you'll find is Neptune lines is the crescent of the moon over the cross. You see? So it's like the divine parabolical dish scooping up the energy up above and concretizing it through the cross down into your world. You see, and you can see the description here. Neptune lines are really spiritual, tranquil, and all that happy stuff, but they also can be very, confusing. Drugs and alcohol and sensitivity can really, mess with things. Though film production and comedy would be fitting very well under a Neptune line. So again, young people, I don't usually like moving to Neptune lines unless they're very aware, because drugs and alcohol and the perception of reality can be skewed. However, there are many intuitive people who truly like Neptune lines because they can be exceedingly spiritual. So that's a way to look at that. So again, if you get right on it, George actually lived in Brentwood, which was, again, very, very close to, well, probably about 25 miles west of Los Angeles. It would have been, you can see LA is right about here. So he was very close. That's Santa Monica. And George would have been actually right about there. That's Brentwood. So he would have been right on top of that thing. So that's the same thing that's applicable for any of you. If you get next to any line, like here's a good example. He had a Saturn line running right through the eastern portion of New Mexico, and again, just the lower tip of Texas, and also, of course, Mexico. Now, again, that's a Saturn midheaven line, completely different. Saturn on the midheaven is taking responsibility. So that's the MO. We'll get into in the reading how exactly each planet works a little more, and the other video that I gave you will cover that. But you get the idea. When you get right on these, extremely powerful, even 100 miles to the west still has a lot of power, but way down. 200, very strong. 300 is really starting to get weak. That's like the front row of the concert hall analogy, you see. And then 600 is really in the back of the concert hall. They get quite a bit weaker. So it's an exponential curve to the west, like a long bell curve and a sharp Z curve to the east. Now, that's the first thing, is the planets. Like George had a beautiful Venus midheaven line running right next to the panhandle of Florida, actually a little more down here in Mississippi by Biloxi. Venus midheaven lines are like Cary Grant movies. They're wonderful. They're beautiful. They're all about artistic creativity. He also, and that would have emphasized career. He also had a Jupiter descending line running right next to New Orleans. Lucky spot for him. Love Jupiter lines. You can see this is the meaning. Again, each one of you in the reading will find yours is going to be completely completely different. But this gives you a familiarity with what goes on in the reading when I do location astrology. And it familiarizes you with your maps. So when you get your personal maps, you'll understand it. So again, he had a Pluto line running right next to Lafayette. Pluto lines are kind of heavy. So you get the idea. The closer you get, the more powerful. Now, the second influence is called the aspects. Now, you'll notice when I turn on the aspects, all the planetary lines will jump to have a little circle with the lineup. They won't move, but you're going to find the map looks like spaghetti because a whole bunch of other lines are going to come in. These are called geometric aspects. See why I don't turn them on looking at a large geographic area like the United States. Now, here's the rule of thumb for these. Notice many of these have triangles. Many of these have squares. And again, the planets, if you can remember where they were, have little circles at the lineup. So those are the most powerful. Wherever you see triangles, think good. Triangles are like going down the road with your favorite music on and no traffic. Good luck finding that in modern society. Squares are a little bit like traffic. So George had a Mercury trine the IC running right next to, that's the Salton Sea, and of course Palm Springs would be right there. And he also had a square right off the coast here. So all of you are going to have squares and trines somewhere. These are the secondary aspects. So wherever you see trines, think good. Squares are a little bit like traffic. You make adjustments. You got to slow down. You got to turn. You got to deal with stuff. So here's how the aspects work. When you get right on them, again, you just like standing in front of the band with your pant legs vibrating. They're almost as strong as the planets, just slightly less. Now, 100 miles either side is the front row of the concert hall. 200 either side is the back of the concert hall, and 300 either side seems to be out in the parking lot. Now, they do have a slightly longer influence to the west, like the planets, but not quite so strong. Close, but not quite so strong. And again, to the east, they really do drop off at 300 miles. So again, just like light and sound, the closer you get to them, the more powerful, the farther away you get, the weaker. And again, you can see when I'm moving my cursor, the latitude and longitudes all show up, and we're mainly interested in longitudes on this kind of a thing. So when you get your reading, it's complex, but you'll notice I give you zoom in areas of your maps that allow you to see where the trines and the squares and the conjunctions to the planets are. So that's the secondary influence. Now, the third influence is all of these horizontal lines. So I'm going to zoom out again to the whole United States. Now, again, this is George's chart. Your chart's going to be different. You're all going to have certain lines somewhere. They may be far apart. They may be bunched together. Like you can see, he's got a lot bunched together here through Texas and the lower portion of the United States than the upper peninsula of Florida. So what do these mean? Well, any place on the globe of the Earth that two planets cross, and that could be in the middle of an ocean, a continent on the other side of the world. Like, here's a good example, just to show it gets complex, but thank God for computers. You can see out in the middle of the ocean, the Pacific here, George just happens to have the planet Uranus crossing the planet Pluto right there at 30 degrees north, 1739. Okay, so notice what it creates right over here, a Pluto-Uranus line. See? So it's exactly what the two planets were. Now, yes, it's going to be strongest here. And when you have multiple planets together, that's like hitting a chord on a piano, you know, and the strength of the notes is how close you are to them. And if they're very close together in your birth chart, or you move away and buy a house or rent or lease or whatever you're going to do, vacation, you'll find the proximity will affect the ones that are closest to you. So it's common sense. So here's the bottom line. Going back to the good old US of A, this is again where people ask me, Jeff, show me the best place to go live. And I always say, well, there's these latitude crossings are called Purans also. This is where the details in astrology really shine. Why? Because some of them are lovely and some of them are suckaroo big time. And I'll just give you a quick example here on George's chart. Like, for instance, up here north of Santa Barbara and Bakersfield, he has a Mercury-Pluto line. Now, if he were to go right on that latitude, now this is where latitude shines. You can see 35 degrees north, 29. That would be, again, like standing in front of the band with your pant leg vibrating with that particular energy. However, only 10 miles north or south is the front row of the concert hall. 20 is the back of the concert hall, north or south. And 30 miles north or south is the back. It's out in the parking lot off the radar screen. Now, some astrologers have disputed that. Some people say, oh, no, you can feel them 60 miles north and 60 miles south. I find that a 60-mile swath is a lot more true to form. Now, some intuitives and some psychics can feel it, and sensitive people can feel it. But I would tell you the real action happens within the first 10 miles north or south. And make no mistake, it works just like the inverse square law. If you find an energy in your reading that I show you that is really good, I literally have people taking GPS or Google Earth. They type in like a property to buy or a place to lease or a town to live in, and they get as close as they can in GPS right to it. Or if you're traveling, if you're an RVer, you can literally take your iPhone or your Droid and see exactly where you're at in your compass. So again, depending on which line it is that you want to emphasize that energy, getting right on it, standing in front of the band with your pant legs vibrating, you're going to get the maximum energy. 10 miles north or south is the back of the concert hall. 10 miles north or south is the front of the concert hall. 20 miles north or south is the back, and 30's out in the parking lot. Now, here's what's important. Each one of these latitude crossings has very specific energies, just like the planets. Like, here's a good example. The one I just showed you here, let's get a California map here up, and you can see if I zoom in, that would be just north of Morro Bay. He has a Mercury-Pluto line. And this is what you'll see in your reports when I send you. And also if I look at astrology for you in various locations, Mercury is logic and Pluto is intensity. And you can see obsessive thoughts. So that's a really intense line that I love to send writers to, or people who really want to work on detailed IT projects, mathematics, all that kind of stuff. Your brain gets cooking. I'm just going to give you a few examples. Now, if George were to go up into San Francisco Bay, he has a Sun-Pluto line. What is that? Sun-Pluto lines can be a little bit pushy and intense. They can be obsessive use of power. You'll notice anything with Pluto is obsession. It's very intense. It's like Popeye on spinach. It's just got a lot of power. And even though it's a small planet, it's powerful. And when you combine it with Sun, that usually tends to run into ego abuses. So that's a couple of examples. Now, look what he's got up above, just north of San Francisco. And every one of you are going to have something different. You can see up here, like if he moved to Roseville, California, which is just north of Sacramento, he would be on one of my favorite lines to send writers, a Mercury-Jupiter line. Now, a lot of you will have Mercury-Jupiter lines in different places, but I can tell you this is an elegant line for intellectualism, for thinking, for logic, it's very happy to. Anything with Jupiter is awesome. Anything with Mercury and Jupiter combinations is awesome. And you can see this is general description. Again, this is only an example for someone's chart. And of course, we're using George Carlin in this case. Now, there's other ones that are lovely and other ones that are challenging. And this is pretty logical, like just north of Everett, Washington, George has a Mars-Pluto line. Now, you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, if he went and he lived right on this line, which is at 48 North 25, that is like flipping matches over an open can of gasoline. I've had many clients move to Mars-Pluto lines, and they all say to me, God, I almost got in a fist fight in a gas station, or road rage, or I get angry all the time. Now, Mars-Pluto lines can really have tremendous benefits and energies, but they can also prove volcanic. This one below it in Seattle, even though Seattle's crazy right now, he's got a Moon-Venus line. I always tell people move to Moon-Venus lines. It's like bliss. It's like, you can see mushroom clouds and still be happy. Not that anybody be happy about that. But on the other hand, it's an elegant line. It's the moon is emotions and Venus is pleasures. That's what I mean. You're very buoyant and uplifting. even in adverse conditions. Sun, Jupiter's the same way. Saturn, Pluto. So it takes time to learn all this stuff. And I want you to know in your readings, you got to stick with the complexities that your chart will have, which will be completely different than anyone else's. That's why if you have a family or you have a partner or a spouse, you really do want to look at all of you, if you're planning on moving somewhere. Like, we found great benefit to looking at children. I always tell the story. I had one psychiatrist who moved to a line called a Moon-Pluto line, and it's very intense. And he said to me, Jeff, what the heck happened? I moved here. He said, I'm on medications. I just have so much anxiety. I said, well, you moved on a Moon-Pluto line. And he read the description and said, oh my God. He said, I'm going to throw the meds in the garbage, because he said, now I understand it's not me. It's the energy I'm living on. So it didn't take it away, but I think it totally changed his perspective to understanding that he was living in that energy. And again, a lot of this is psychology. It's all energy. When you really come down to it, nothing is really excellently good or bad, because I've seen good lines be good to excess, like people drink too much or they party too much on Moon-Venus lines. Life becomes like a Cary Grant movie. Or I've seen people go on challenging lines and make the best of them when they figure out what the energy is. So the whole purpose of your reading, and that'll be in section 3 of your booklet, is to understand the basic premises of location astrology. And you've just seen the major ones. Now, there are also things called midpoints. These are what I call the fly specks in the pepper. They involve 2 planets, and they're midpoints, and they're kind of complex. But the bottom line, there's a lot of them. And I only view, they have a very narrow influence. Maybe 35 miles either side of the line is the front row of the concert hall. Maybe 70 is the back, and about 100 is out in the parking lot. So they have a narrow influence, but they're very powerful when you're right on them. So there's that. And then many astrologers use something called planetary directions. And what that is, that's a much different animal. But planetary directions, I don't use as much. A lot of people rely on them, I think, a little slavishly. But planetary directions, you can see, fan out from your birth chart. And the theory was the direction of good planets would always bring you good things. And the direction of malefics would bring you more challenging things, like Saturn's always responsibility. Mars is intensity. Jupiter is blessings. So that is one other thing I do look at, but not as strongly as I do the planets and also the relocation charts. So this is, again, a very basic introductory to location astrology. You can watch this again if you'd like, but it's important because astrology is not simple, but it is a science. A lot of people call it a pseudoscience, but really what it is it's astronomy extrapolated to you where you live. And it's amazing stuff. I cannot tell you over the years how accurate location astrology has been. Now, one final thing, and then we're done. You're going to notice there's 5 maps in your reading. These are called transits and progressions. And if you notice up here at the upper left, it says natal. It says the person's name and natal. Natal means it's your birth chart, which is this. Now, when I click this OK, you're going to notice it changes to George Carlin's transits. Now, George ain't here no more, so he's not got any transits, at least not here. So, but I think he's happy where he's at. He didn't like it here sometimes. So long story short is, if you look at this, I'm going to put up a time tool. Now, every one of you will have major transits going by, and we only look at the outer transits. And the outer transits are really Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Those are the big guys. You'll notice as I go forward here in monthly increments, I'm just playing around here. Planets will go back and forth. So I only look at the major transits for a person in your given locality, because all of you are going to live somewhere else in the world. Some people live in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, South America, all over the world, Southeast Asia. So we'll extrapolate that to whatever your locality is. But I always look at transits, and especially major ones, because if you get Pluto transits heavy transits from Neptune, they can change your life. Pluto transits are once in a lifetime. See? So like George has Pluto transiting over New Orleans. You can see those can last up to a couple of years of intensity, and they can be very powerful and very dicey when they come through. The other ones are the progressions and transits. The major ones used in astrology are tertiary and secondary progressions. Just so you know, those are much slower moving, and they can hang around and affect a place for years. So this is important stuff. You can see, like if George were alive right now, he'd have a Venus ascending secondary progression moving into where he used to live in Brentwood. And that would have been right over him the spring of 2024. Those are very pleasurable. So this is where astrology really gets accurate and yet detailed. And that is, you have to look and blend at the natal is the most important. The first map we spent all the time on, because that never changes. And the progressions and transits are very important depending on what you got come in. And believe me, it is complex. That's why I spend close to 40 minutes preparing for all these readings for everyone to look at all these various details in the Vedic astrology, the location, and progressions and transits. So it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of work. But to be accurate, that's what you got to do. So this is a real taste. The last one I'll show you is the solar arcs. Solar arcs are a family, what we call primary directions, and they're exceedingly important in anyone's chart. And they are slow moving trains. They are once in a lifetime energies. And you can see if I animate, George would have had the moon rolling into the Los Angeles area by 2027. And trust me, you can feel these when they're within 300 miles. And just like light and sound, the closer they get, the more powerful. Remember, 300 miles is about the front row of the concert hall for a major planet. So that moves in. I'm going in monthly increments just to show you. So each one of you will have solar arcs somewhere. I've seen some people live for 20, 30 years and not have any major solar arcs. I've also seen people have groups of energies coming through your given locality. Wherever you live, vacation, or move to, you're going to find that these are very important things to assess. And you can't just do it quickly or you won't get accuracy. Point in case, I've had people move to wonderful energies and have very challenging progressions or transits, or very good progressions and transits modify it. So it's either super good or it's moderately good. The bottom line is, when you have good energies in your birth chart, which again, going back, you can see here to the natal birth chart, that's the most important, because I always liken location astrology to being in a boat. If you're in a 6-foot rowboat, which is like a bad place, on rough seas, you're going to get swamped real easy with just even a little bit of waves. If you're in a great place like sun lines bring health, they bring vitality. Jupiter lines bring spirituality. Venus is pleasure and artistic creativity. Pluto lines are intensity, transformational. So whatever you're looking for, location astrology is probably going to show you where your best and challenging places are. And again, everybody has a different purpose in life and a different desire in life. And that's where location astrology is really quite magical. So I know this is a lot of information, but that's what astrology is. It's detailed astrological scientific information, and it's extrapolated in math. Again, I'm not channeling anything here. These are where the mathematical, astrological, geometric energies line up in George Carlin's chart. So I look forward to doing a reading for you in location astrology. It is a part of the personal readings, or you can do it separately. Thanks for watching. I'd like to share something with you. And this is a little video that I'm putting together for people before readings that could understand some good source material and books to read on spirituality, and also some of the things that supports the incredible spiritual journey that Vedic astrology, Nadi astrology, and the ancient traditional astrology show. And it proves some of these books that we are definitely not our astrology, but we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. So one of the books that I'm going to start with here is probably one of my favorite. It is called The Magus of Strovolos, and it's about a man who we're going to get to here in just a minute, named Daskalos. That's his nickname. And he lived on the island of Cyprus. This is a book I would love to throw out of helicopters and have everyone read before they die, and then leave it on the street corner for your brothers and sisters. So let's go. I'm going to show you here on Amazon. A lot of people don't like Amazon, but it's a great way to at least index some of these books for you. So here we go. The first book that I'll show you is called The Magus of Strovolos. You can see it right here. It's written by a man named Kyriakos Markides. Now, Markides is not the healer that this book is about. And Strovolos, just FYI, is a city on the island of Cyprus, which many people will know is in the Mediterranean Sea, very close to Jerusalem and just south of Turkey. Well, there's a city there called Nicosia, and Strovolos is a suburb of it. So what's interesting is Markides grew up as a young man, and his priest used to tell him, stay away from this man named the Magus of Strovolos. He must have cohorts with the spirits and the devils, or he couldn't heal people the way he does. So Markides came to the United States, and he became a professor of sociology. Very smart man. So he went back on a sabbatical in the late 80s and ran into this healer called the Magus of Strovolos, who I'm going to show you who he is in a minute. And he essentially said, wow, he said he witnessed him healing people of incurable diseases, cancers, gangrene, crushed bones, etc., etc. The book's amazing. You got to read it and you'll see. And what happened is he said, can I write a book about you? I'm on sabbatical. And the healer looked at him and said, you know, for the last several lifetimes, you've caused a lot of problems with your left brain focus on the world. He says, yes, you can write a book. So Markides followed the healer around with tape recorder, pad, and pencil. Remember, this is the late 80s. You didn't have iPhones and smartphones and all that, and recorded basically everything that was happening and asked some very good questions. And he was a bit of a skeptic at first, and that's what makes this book so great. So I'm going to show you who the healer is in a minute, but the stories in this book will blow your hair back. And he spends an awful lot of time on things called thought form elementals. And many of you may have heard or are familiar with Dr. Emoto. Dr. Emoto, these are just two pictures that he basically talked about how messages in water would record in the frozen water energies that were apparent at the time. Like he would have people pray over water, and many different pictures in his book. I encourage you to read his books, Dr. Emoto, Messages in Water, and many others. He passed away, and interesting man. Anyways, long story short, he found that positive sacred thoughts always came out looking like sacred geometry. Fear, worry, anger, discord always came out looking like gobbledygook. And many of the ancient mystics of India believed that we emitted those thought forms out of our third eye chakra. When you read the Magus of Strovolos, he felt the same way. And these permeate our aura, and this energy cycles through the Mars chakra at the top of the head. And of course, that's Jupiter, that's Venus, that's the sun, that's Mercury, that's the moon, and there's the root Saturn chakra. So again, modern Western allopathic medicine doesn't really subscribe to these things, but energetically, these are extremely powerful. So you will find, and this is why gemstones work so well, which I'm going to be recommending in your session too. I get natural, untreated gemstones that are very pure, and I set them as talismans to reinforce the energetics of the body, which are amazing stuff. And then you cleanse them and charge them with prayers called mantras. So anyways, back to the Magus of Strovolos. Very, very important stuff. Why? Because this book is probably one of the few books that I think really covers some of the spiritual aspects of who we are as spiritual beings having a physical experience. And this is a book, again, I'd love to throw out of helicopters and have everybody read. And I love it if you have a busy schedule, which many people do. You can read this. It's short chapters, very concise. I've read this book 30 times over the years, and I'll probably read it another 30 before I draw a last breath, hopefully. So the bottom line is, wonderful book. Love this book. Now, I'm going to show you who the Magus of Strovolos is. You go to stoaseries.com, and Stoa Series is the Magus of Strovolos' own website. And you can see here, you want to go to books on English, and this is the Magus of Strovolos. Many people know him as Daskalos. Daskalos is kind of the nickname. It means the healer in Grecian language. And you can find videos on him too. And I love Daskalos because he was cantankerous and he really laid it down. This is a book called Words of Truth, obviously. And his daughter Panyota had put together a series of his recordings and lectures on his stoa, which was his porch where he gave lectures. And this is a wonderful book because there's a lot of insights in this. The other two books I highly recommend is Esoteric Teachings and Esoteric Practices. The reason I mention these is because these were written by Daskalos, or the Magus of Strovolos himself. His real name, by the way, was Dr. Stylianos Sateshlis. You can see I'm highlighting that right there. So he was a theologian as well as an exceedingly powerful mystic. You'll read in his books, he used to heal children on the playground at 7 years old. He's healed completely incurable diseases, cancers, etc. Amazing stuff. So these two books I highly recommend. You can buy anything you want. I'm not here to tell you what to do. But Esoteric Teachings is all about theology. And it goes through many of the things that I talk about, the hierarchies of the angels and the spirits and the intelligences, where astrology really is hundreds of dimensions below where our souls are created. So, and again, you know, I've mentioned that kind of stuff on some of the other diagrams that I love to show. And again, this one right here, many people have heard me speak about that on other videos. So you'll love Esoteric Teachings, Esoteric Practices, because what it does is it really gives you theology. Now, Esoteric Practices is really some deep stuff on how to train the lower conscious mind. Now, psychology likes to tell us we have a conscious, subconscious mind, but this really sharpens the lower conscious mind, which in the Hebrew is known as the nefesh. And people might say, well, what does that mean? The nefesh is literally what I would call the lower conscious mind. It's a strange word that is believed to develop in the womb. And literally, as we become little children and we're exposed to all the different languages and people and experiences, so on and so forth, I always like to call the nefesh the keyboard, the mouse, and the screen, kind of like the computer analogy, or if you like, the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brake, that we run our consciousness through this miraculous body. So the nefesh is not us. It's our ego. It's our lower sense of self. And of course, many of the religions have tried to get us to realize, and some of them are very accurate and some of them have failed sorely with their dogma, at, you know, getting us to realize that there's a sense of self. There's the conscience. There's all these things. Well, that's known as the spirit, the neshama, the haya, and the upper portions of the soul, which I refer to these a lot in readings only because it's really important stuff to get a hold of, I think, to conceptualize what astrology is. Why am I going into all this? Is because the Magus of Strovolos, I think, does an elegant job at focusing on these elements in his talks and in his books. And he's one of the few mystics that really does it well. He uses things like the psychonoetic double, which is the outer spirit surrounding the body, or auric field. So you'll really love these books. I love to bring all this up because I don't want to take time from your reading to do this. I want to take time so that you can go into this on your own. And it'll really, I think, help answer a lot of questions that we're into. Another book that I would love to explain to people, and this is a wonderful book too, for any of you who are interested in regression work or that kind of therapy work. Let me show you another book that I love, and I'll go back to Amaskron here. I call it Amaskron. And it's a book that is very wonderful. It is called 30 Years Among the Dead. And I'll be brief here, but I talk about this book a lot in radio shows and various things. And this is about a doctor who was very hardcore. He graduated from the Chicago School of Medicine somewhere around, I think, 1916, 1918. It's in the book. And what's so amazing about this book, he was the doctor who popularized shock therapy treatment. It's kind of like a Hollywood noir horror movie. So he was really into the hardcore science. He did not believe anything to do whatsoever with spirituality, ghosts, and all this other stuff. So what's so great about this book is the foreword and the journey in it. And this kind of parallels the Magus of Strovolos in a lot of ways, because Dr. Wickland came to the Los Angeles County Mental Institution somewhere in the late teens or early 20s. It's in the book. And the stories in this book are fantastic, and you'll see why. So he didn't believe in anything to do with spirituality. He was busy, doing all the work he did. I think he might even done lobotomies. He doesn't mention it too much in the book, but definitely shock therapy treatment, which is still used to this day, which is believed to release multiple personality disorders and also possession. Or weird phenomena with the, mental disturbances. So long story short, he goes to Mr. Linear, Mr. Science, goes to a party and meets a woman, becomes smitten with her, marries her. And to his amazement, he finds out that she's a psychic channel. So now you have Mr. Left Brain, hardcore, college-educated, science doctor, all that, who doesn't believe in any of this stuff, marries a woman who is a psychic channel. So he undertakes a study to see if she's insane or not, or delusional would be the better words, as to channeling spirits. To his amazement, and this book is so well documented, to his amazement, she takes on a spirit who looks at him and says, "You're the one shocking me with that lightning." And he says, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, the other day you just, hit me with these probes and you were shocking me. And he proceeded to explain a shock therapy treatment that went awry that Dr. Wickland knew he couldn't have known had he not been there. He says, "My God," he says, "you must be a deceased person possessing my wife's aura." And the man looks down and sees the wedding ring and the dress, and, "Oh my God, you must be right. That makes sense. Nobody can understand me anymore, and nobody can, talk to me." So he gets the man to Dr. Wickland gets the man to realize his condition, and he goes, quote unquote, off into the light. I guess he saw his mother, who's been deceased many years. Well, here's the crux. The patient who he did the shock therapy treatment on clears up. And I believe it was a woman, and she was discharged within a very short amount of time with a clean bill of health. So that was why this book has the title 30 Years Among the Dead, because the next 30 years he spends researching through his wife all these disincarnate souls, and not just his patients either. So many wonderful stories of people who came back and said, the religions aren't telling us the truth, and this and that and what have you. So this is an amazing book for anyone exploring the worlds of spirituality and who we are. And you'll see in your readings why I go into a lot of stuff about the Vedic astrology and the cycles you're in. So this is a wonderful book for people to read. I love this book. And I tell you, if anybody who doesn't believe in reincarnation and that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, I think this is a linear treatise that lays it bare so well. It's amazing. The next book I like to recommend is this one, Freeing the Captives. This is by Dr. Louise Ireland Fry, who just passed away. She was a wonderful woman, very old. And she was a medical doctor, allopathic medicine, got sick and tired of the prescriptions and the surgeries, not that they can't help sometimes, but she said there's something else going on. So she became a regressionary therapist. And this book is astounding as well. This is a series of clinical studies where she would get people under hypnosis and someone else would start talking. "Well, John, what are you doing in my patient's body?" "I don't know. It's very strange. I was floating down this river and next thing I know, I'm out of ammunition." The person evidently was killed in a war or something and was trapped. And time doesn't exist when we get in the astral worlds, also known as death. So this book has so many wonderful documented cases where patients cleared up afterwards. So even the most staunchest skeptics have to agree this is pretty amazing stuff because this happened to people. Another book, that is also supportive of that, is a favorite of mine, is this one, The Unquiet Dead. The Unquiet Dead is, again, a psychologist, Dr. Edith Fiore. This was written back in the 90s. Wonderful book. Again, same thing. Psychologists got sick and tired of the left brain, approaches and started exploring hypnotherapy. The poor lady had her license ripped out of her hand. And I hear this from a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists. They very quietly do sessions with me in the Vedic astrology because they don't want the board who dangles their license and all this stuff to get in the way of their practitioners. So they keep things very quiet. But this is an amazing book as well. Many clinical cases. You'll absolutely love it. And for anybody who's interested in this stuff, there's a book called The Spirit Releasement Manual. Now, I have this book. It's a great book. It's a wonderful introductory to this. You may want to pursue this. There's also a lot of wonderful places you can get training in this. But this covers a lot of the background in this field of work, hypnotherapy techniques and suggested modalities, looks at many other things. It's a manual, so to speak, a desk reference manual. So that's a little bit of a look into some of this stuff that parallels the whole journey of the Magus of Strovolos. Now, there's a couple short books I'd also like to mention too, and this is one of my favorite books. This is a text that is a Hebrew English translation known as the Sha'arei HaGilgam. I mention this book a lot. This is actually a companion volume. It's a Hebrew English parallel translation. And this was written by Rabbi Luria. Rabbi Luria was the protege of a very famous rabbi known as the Ari. And of course, you could see they call him the Arizals, English translation of the work on reincarnation. See, Sha'ar or Sha'arei means gate or gates, and Hagilgam means cycling of the souls in the Aramaic and Hebrew. And this book is stunning. Again, our fine friends in Rome, somewhere between the 1st and the 3rd century, threw a lot of this stuff out. Original Christianity had the doctrines of reincarnation, in my opinion. And there's many other texts that support this in Chaldea and Hebrew. Almost all your ancient cultures believed in some reincarnational factors. And look at the American Indians way on back, the Tibetan Lamas, the yogis in India. It's the center core of many of their beliefs. So the Sha'arei HaGilgam is kind of a nice Judeo-Christian way to look at the truths about who we are. And in this book, it actually breaks down a lot of the things I was looking at earlier, where I was showing you the lower conscious mind is referred to as the Nefesh, the spirit is the Rosh, and of course the Neshama, the Haya, and the Yechida, which is the upper portions of the soul. This book, the Sha'arei HaGilgam, gets elegantly into this, and it talks about how when we incarnated into this particular dimension, we fragment. In fact, the evil spirits may be forced right at a molecular level to be joining this world together. So, in fact, in physics, we all know everything is energy, right? Positive, negative, protons, electrons, neutrons, all this stuff, day and night, juxtaposing forces, right? So very, very powerful, interesting stuff in the physics world and quantum physics that ties in with the evil spirits might actually be forced and incarcerated here to be a part of birth, growth, death, and all of that stuff. So very deep stuff. And that's why a lot of people question, why does Vedic astrology show the good and the evil and all points in between? Well, that's why. It's karma. To us Westerners, we always look at karma as bad, right? Well, you can also have good karma. And that's exactly what's shown here. It's just this etheric energy that leads from death to rebirth. And of course, you could see in the Upanishads, those are some other great texts I would recommend to people, is the Upanishads. They're known as the minor and the majors. And they speak in many different versions of the Puranas and also the Upanishads about the planets are called graha in Sanskrit. And graha is a meaning that means seizer or grasper of the aura. So I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This truly might be the matrix here, the spiritual matrix of the celestial influences. So very fascinating stuff and deep stuff. No one's ever going to figure this stuff out quick. And when you do that, let me know. But anyhow, the bottom line is the Sha'arei HaGilgam is an elegant text to really awaken us we are so much more than our physical bodies, our money, and all this stuff, even though this stuff's all important and we need to take care of it all. But it's really, truly shows the path of the soul, which I think a lot of the religions have failed in some areas on that issue. So long story short, have fun with this. There's a great story about spiritual depossession at the end of the 40th chapter. These are a dual, chapter booked from chapter 1 to 40 over here. You can see this is 36 to 40 where I'm pointing. So there's a great story in there using the magic of the Psalms and the scriptures on how to dislodge a spirit that was possessed in a person. We call it possession. And again, all these books that I'm mentioning, the Magus of Strovolos, again, 30 Years Among the Dead and the, Unquiet Dead and Freeing the Captives. And these are just a few books. There's so many books I'm sure many of you have heard of. But this is a cohesive tying in of all this stuff that I really, really enjoy. Another set of texts that is really quite profound. This is a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole. This is called the Nefesh Hasitzim. And again, the Nefesh could be just synonymous with the lower conscious mind. And Hasitzim is kind of like stuffing the consciousness into a body. These meat suits we call bodies. So this is a very obscure but wonderful text that you may or may not want to get into. This was actually not that long ago. This was written in the 1700s, but very ancient knowledge and wonderful stuff. Another set of texts, if you want to go down the rabbit hole a different way, I love the Shemush Tehillim. The Shemush Tehillim is the ancient Psalms. You cannot get this book since COVID came in, but the Shemush means like the method, and Tehillim is the Psalms. The Psalms may be up to 4,000 years old. No one knows. I don't know. But there's speculation. Psalm 91 could be close to 4,000 years old, and some of the other ones were too. And there's secret ciphers and cryptology that has angels and spirits and intelligences and attributes of God's kingdom, if you will, of hierarchies that are encrypted in the original Psalms. Well, we all know the Psalms were smacked in the middle of the Bible, right? Between the English Vulgate and English translations of the Old Testament and the New. What's a shame is what has been lost in the ancient cryptology. If you can acquire this book, I hope it comes back online. It is a book put out by Fabrizio Lanza out of Italy. And the more traditional Hebrew ones are the Schatzstein. That is an elegant translation too, I might add. And there's been criticisms of this particular Shemush Tehillim here I'm circling not being exactly perfect. But I can tell you, it's the best you're going to get that lays bare all this stuff in English. And the few mistakes that I have found, and I do agree with the rabbis on that, but I would also say it is an elegant translation. It's probably 98% correct in terms of its translations. And I also have other versions of the Shemush Tehillim that are profound. I mean, there's all these ciphers and codes that you drop the Aramaic and Hebrew through that really gives you an amazing point of this. So there are other versions. Hopefully I can have more information about that. But if you can Google and find any of these things used, buy them because they're really expensive right now. They originally were, you can get them for $12-15. So, very hard to get, and see if you can. They should come back online at a low price soon. So another set of texts going down the rabbit hole here, a little bit more towards the ancient Indian things. This is a wonderful book. This is a book called The Vedas. And, Vedic astrology actually came. A friend of mine, Chakrapani, who's passed away, a lot of people knew him. He was an astrologer in Santa Monica. And he passed away. He was in his late 80s. Very nice man. And he might have been the guy who coined the term Vedic astrology. He said, Americans are never going to know what Vedic or what Jyotisha means, so we'll call it Vedic astrology. And he did. So the Vedas are a collections of texts that are exceedingly old. And there's the Samhitas, the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the White Black Sama, and Artha Vedas. Amazing stuff. There's also things called the Puranas. And I don't have anything here right now. But the Puranas are, there's a whole series of texts. There's like 18 Puranas. These are all about the different paths of the souls. Another amazing text is the Brihat Samhita, and that's the Samhitas are in here. So amazing stuff. I could go on and on about the Upanishads, the Vedas, and the Puranas. Talk about all these waves of souls angels coming through. Fascinating stuff. You'll really enjoy it. Another book that I want to finish up with here is this book. This is one of my more favorite books. This is done by Rabbi Fatea, and it's called Minhat Yehuda. And this is a very interesting book. And again, by no means is this conclusive. I could rattle off books forever for you, but these are some of the more, I think, salient books you want to really jump on and check out. This book I love because Rabbi Fatea lived in Baghdad, and this was in the 1800s. And Fatea had warned many of the people in the Middle East. He said, quit screwing around with your black magic and summoning spirits and using salt water and all this stuff that they did and rituals and summoning. This stuff still goes on today, and it's very dangerous. And I would urge anybody who gets around that stuff, stay away from it. It's very, very dangerous. People literally do get possessed, and you can go down the rabbit hole in a very bad way. Anyways, this book, the first 88 chapters, is very biblical. It's a bit cryptic, but very, very good. But chapter 88 is fascinating because chapter 88 is almost 200 pages of stories of spirits that got trapped either in bodies or what he likes to call the Asiatic and lower Yetziratic worlds. Now, we just say dead people, ghosts, all that stuff. And there's all kinds of very deep stuff about possession, ghosts, and spirits all about us. In fact, there are many books, even in the Zohar is another book I could have mentioned. The Zohar is very popular in the Kabbalah centers right now. Very good. Rabbi Yehuda and his sons translate that. It's a very good translation. But secrets, again, in there galore in the ciphers and codes that are not in a lot of the modern translations. Anyways, long story short, not to get too deep here. What is so fascinating about Rabbi Yehuda's work is he said, when we exit these meat suits known as bodies, we will end up in some area of the astral planes and or we will matriculate up depending on the spiritual purity of the soul. And you could say the consciousness that we've achieved in these incarnations. Very deep stuff. So here's what's so cool about this book. He had a man, and before I get into this last story, he would also, there's great stories in here about how he had lower classes of angels. We always hear about Archangel Michael slaying the devil, which is great. But we also will find that there are the archangels and these upper angels here that are very, very powerful. They actually say if the seraphims quit chanting God's name, the entire universes might evaporate in less than a nanosecond, that they actually permeate all this energy we call atomic matter and all the other stuff we're just beginning to understand, consciousness and all these various different, incredibly diverse energetic fields of energy called life. And in its extremely complex forms, that they literally facilitate the whole fabric of the etheric energy of the universes. And the scientists are busy looking at, elements and molecules and atoms and amino acids and light and all. That's deep stuff, way past our understanding that the angels literally are believed to maintain. So when we exit these bodies, or these meat suits known as bodies, we will end up somewhere either leaving here, so to speak, and not reincarnating, or we'll keep coming back until we not only purify our own souls, but many of the texts claim that we're sharing soul roots with not just mommy, daddy, grandpa, and grandma, and all this other stuff. We may give birth to children. We may have relationships with people, have bad encounters with people that karma's finishing up. We may have lawsuits or anger or fights or love and beautiful things and children. All this kind of stuff is exceedingly complex and beyond anyone's full comprehension. And that is why this mark was made right beneath our nose and our upper lip, and to make us forget, they say. So maybe that'll change someday soon when the axis tips in the earth. But the long story short is I'm going into a lot of detail here, but this is cool because that's what this book gets into, is a lot of this deep stuff. So long story short, Yehuda actually has stories of angels that he actually had brought to him. And the shapes and descriptions will blow your mind. This is a must-read book. So I'll finish this whole section up with this, is that Yehuda would depossess people. What he's got in his hands there is unifications and purifications. They're amazing. Unifications are a simple thing where, well, it's not simple at all, but it's fasting and techniques that purify the soul. And unifications and rectifications are to try and purify the soul so it can be released to move on. And long story short, and I'll finish with this story. There's a man who was trapped in a woman's body. He was possessing her. And he read his kind of records and found out what had happened to him. And this is the story. Apparently, in the previous incarnation, he was a very successful businessman, and he was, I don't know, in his late 20s, early 30s, and I don't know what the age was, it's in the book, but he was making his journey home in the 1800s to his parents because he was going to buy them some servants. Of course, back then we bought servants. Today we buy dishwashers and cars. So it's the 1800s. So he's hoofing it back to his parents. He stops at this little inn on the last leg of the journey, pays for the room, gets the key, goes to his hotel room. Well, the innkeeper looks over at his young son and says, did you see all the gold that guy had in that bag when he paid for the room? And yeah. So he hands him an extra key, says, you get in there tonight and you get the gold. So the guy gets the gold, the young innkeeper's son. He ends up almost out the door, and the young man jumps him. They get in a knife fight, and the innkeeper's son kills the young man on the way home to his parents. So this is all in the book, if I get anything wrong. So the bottom line is he ends up in what we might call a celestial court. It's all in this book. It's incredible. And the angels say, do you forgive this man? No, I don't forgive that SOB. I want him to get just what I got. Boom, right back in incarnation. Well, he ends up, and remember, this is the mysteries of this life. He ends up, what? Blocked, just like all of us are. This big, thick, this dashed line is the mark between our nose and our upper lip to make us forget. So this is the so-called conscious mind in psychology. And up above here is the so-called subconscious mind. And we can all go to psychics, astrologers, and intuitives, and they'll give you some good stuff, but it's pretty hard to see everything. So only really, really true deep mystics can see deep in there. And some people can. I've met people that are amazing. So anyways, if you get lucky, go for it. And in the astrology, I can see a lot of stuff back there. It's really fascinating with Nadi astrology. So bottom line is, he says, the angel said, do you forgive this man? No, I don't forgive him. So he's reincarnated. And this young man now in this next life grows up, he goes back to the same inn, and unbeknownst to him, now this is like 25, 30 years later, the young innkeeper's son is now probably in his 60s, something like that. It's in the book. And he ends up murdering him in the same room. They got in a fight again, in the same room that he was murdered in originally. So this is, and then of course, when he died, then he ends up possessing a woman. And this is very interesting, this book, because you'll find, even in the Magus of Strovolos, to bring this to closure, that a lot of us, if we're not consciously aware, because I think the religions have really failed in this sense, not that I'm bashing religions here, though a couple of them need it, but the bottom line is there's clearly an awareness of our journey that once we get it, we start escaping from Alcatraz, if you will, from the reincarnational processes. And hopefully all these books, these are just a few books. I could talk about books for at the end of time. They're wonderful. Hopefully this will help you to understand a little bit of the kind of the theology that I like to use in readings so that we can spend more time specifically talking about your cycles. And this stuff I can just refer to, and we don't have to take valuable time from your session. Okay. So, again, let's hope that this gives you some great stuff to study, because many people are very interested in pursuing this line of work. And it's a work that I really enjoy, and it has a lot to do with, I think, who we are as spiritual beings. So thanks for listening, and I look forward to doing the reading with you.